on our webinars and really have started to think about um, the situation that everyone's in coming back to school and what's most helpful. So the feedback that we're getting from a lot of teachers right now is that they feel that their students have lost a lot of ground. A lot of teachers are feeling that they're having a hard time catching everybody up, that there's not enough hours in the day, that there's a lot of instruction that has to take place, and we're still in classrooms where there is a lot of interruptions with kids who may or may not have been exposed to COVID coming in and out of the classroom. So objectively, one of our goals really was to talk with you today about ways in which we hope to simplify the process of really conferencing with kids. And when you have a whole classroom of writers, not a lot of time, how can we maximize that instruction? And how do we do that when we're looking at student work and trying to move all of our students ahead? So that's what our goal is today. And again, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with us. I'm Diane. Auray, I am one of the co-founders of Empowering Writers, and I'm joined today with Diane Lazar.
Hi all, welcome. I'm the Director of Training and Education with Empowering Writers.
So Diane and I sat down and said, okay, so what can we do this week that would be really helpful to really address the kinds of conversations we're having now? So, feel free to chat in as we're presenting. I think a lot of you, I see a lot of familiar names, so you know what the drill is in terms of the way that works. If you can take off your cameras, we'd love to see faces. It's always nice to talk to people. And then let's talk a little bit about the objectives today. So ideally, we're going to couch everything in the idea that we're going to be trying to look at ways in which to maximize instructional time. We're going to take you through what we call the authors group revision model, which will tell you what that is and how it works in just a few moments. And we're going to show you how we focus our conversations with our students on skills taught. So one of the challenges always with teaching is when we're giving students assessments, lots of times we have to look at the whole. What we really want to try to do is make sure that we're looking at what skills have we taught that our students are actually mastering and applying. And then we're going to demonstrate how we use the authors group revision model for that revision process. And then we're going to provide some feedback and show you ways in which you can apply some prescriptive lessons. And again, ultimately, our goal really for you today is to try to simplify that conferencing process that we currently have. So with that in mind, we're going to start with really the most important thing that we always talk about, and that's our objective. So for all of you that are with us right now, could you just type in a yes or a no if you use Empowering Writers? Just type in yes or no if you're currently an Empowering Writers user. Thank you for those of you who are just put those in. Great. Okay. I just want to know that so that when I have a couple of scattered no's, I just want to make sure that I can give a little bit of background. So here we have our methodology. So anybody who uses Empowering Writers is familiar with our methodology. This means that all of our instruction is set up that way. That we do every single time, whole class instruction. So all of our students are hearing the same thing. This is all about common language and assured experiences. So step number one is we introduce and define the skill through the use of a published text. So for example, if I'm going to be teaching about elaborative detail, I'm going to show an example in text in terms of what that looks like. And then I'm going to define why and how our author uses elaborative detail. Step two is the modeling process, which is where we as the teacher talk out loud as the author. We ask those detail generating questions. We start to build vocabulary. We get all of our students to join in on this modeling component so that everybody has an opportunity to share. This is the time in which we actually build language as we model the process of creating elaborative detail. And then from there, if I did an elaborative segment on the forest, everyone is going to go to their seats and write exactly what I modeled. So they're going to look at what I do. They're going to listen to the language I build. They're going to see the productive questions that I create. And then from there, they're going to go to guided practice and they're going to try creating their own segment on the forest. And after doing this many times over, we're going to see this process in application. But a couple of things about this that I really want to point out. Remember, we say this all the time. Oral language always precedes written language. If they can't say it, they can't write it. So we always try to encourage that language. And the other thing is, remember that our methodology is the methodology that builds common language, which is going to allow us to take you through the process that we're going to do next, which is going to be that authors group revision model. So for all of you who use that methodology, you're really set up in a good way to go through the next process, the next steps that we want to share with you, which is what is that authors group revision? So the authors group revision model is really based on the idea that in the real world, authors, when they are working on texts, many times they get together with a group of their peers and they share what they've written. And in sharing, so they have this conversation about what's good, where some improvements can be made. And because they're all authors, they're all speaking the same language. So they have something to build off of. So what we're doing is taking that exact same process and we're applying it to whole class instruction. So typically what it looks like is this. Before we ever start is we identify an area that we want to really work on. And then we choose that representative piece of a student work. And I'm going to tell you now, sometimes it's a student in my class. Sometimes it might be a student in Diane's class. So depending upon how I want to handle that, I take it, nobody knows because it's always anonymous. We pick a piece of student work. Then we talk about the weaknesses that we want to address. And really, I'm picking the piece because of the weakness that I want to address. I don't necessarily say it to my students because this is going to be a learning process. I read the piece with the class and we talk about the skills that are there. We apply the skills and we show students exactly how I can model the revision. And then the class is going to try it on their own. So imagine that everybody just wrote an elaborative segment about the forest. I take one representative piece, I read it, I focus on some skills that I really want to my students to hone in on. What I always say, what's the biggest bang for my buck? Then I'm going to work on that particular skill with them. I'm going to model what that looks like. And now everybody in the classroom has written a segment about the forest. They're all going to apply that. So the good news about this particular revision model is all of my students benefit from the conversation that's taking place, as opposed to me having 25 kids in the classroom and going around and conferencing with everyone individually. What happens is I lose a lot of instructional time that way, and I have a lot of students waiting. That doesn't mean that I don't go and conference with my students individually as they start to revise. But the good news is that the first conversation about revision takes place as a whole. So that's how we start this particular objective. Now, let me show you what this might look like. And we're going to take you through this process. So here we have a sample. And Di, I'm going to have you take them through how we would do this in our classroom.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daya. So this is a representative sample of a skill. So those of you who use Empowering Writers, you know that we go skill by skill. We break informational narrative writing into its manageable components. This particular student sample happens to come from an informational piece where the students were learning how to apply the detail generating questions. So we're in that supporting detail time. Previously, the students have been taught genre and organization, broad yet distinct main ideas, including word reference and sentence starters, adding sentence variety, and we've started to learn how to apply the detail generating questions to the supporting details. So this is very representative of a student who's just starting out with that particular skill. And I want to read it, and I want you to think about what this particular student did with these supporting details. Your dog will be happier if he is well trained. That's our main idea, so the student understands it's a main idea. And to be honest with you, it's just one paragraph, so we're not beyond one paragraph at this point. He needs to come when he is called so he can be safe. He needs to sit and stay. Put your hand up and say, sit, in a firm voice. Your canine should let you know when he has to go outside. He needs to stay off the furniture. He shouldn't chew or scratch things. So some of you are looking at this and you're thinking, wow, that's not so bad. I think that's pretty good. And I agree with you. The student has some skill. There is some baseline here that we can look to. But to be honest with you, the skill focus that's really the weakest in this particular piece, and the one that I want to hone in on, is the supporting details and using what we call the detail generating questions. Those of you who are familiar with Empowering Writers, our informational detail generating questions are, what does it look like and why is it important? Now, if I have a student like this and I take a look at this representative sample, I can imagine that the rest of my students in the classroom are doing something similar. So as I'm walking around, as I'm providing feedback, I happen to notice this. So that's a great time for this author's revision model, because you're noticing that many of your students are doing something similar. They're only applying that particular skill kind of in a scant way. So let me show you, and I'm going to stop my share of my PowerPoint for a second, and I'm going to share my page so that you can see how I might do this in the classroom. So in my classroom, I have the piece all written out. I may have to rewrite it if it's been typed or if it's hard to read. I rewrite that particular piece. And then what I do is I'm going to go step by step through the process. So the skill that we want to apply are the detailed generating questions. I call them the DGQs in my classroom. And I want to kind of look at this piece with my students and go over what worked really well and then begin to apply this particular skill. So your dog will be happier if he is well trained. That's our main idea. Every detail needs to be focused on that particular main idea. So let's look at our details. He needs to come when he's called. That's our first detail, so he can be safe. He needs to sit and stay. There's another detail. Your canine should let you know when he has to go outside. He needs to stay off the furniture, and he shouldn't chew or scratch things. So this particular student has 5 details, which is fine. It basically follows the pillar structure, and he or she added an extra detail. But now let's go back and look at the detail generating questions, because here's the reality. In my classroom, if my students are doing this kind of work and I think, wow, that's pretty good, but here's what I want to see happen. I want them to write more, give more detail. And when I give that kind of feedback to students, guess what? They have no idea what I mean by that. So that's when we go back to the detail generating questions. Remember, every detail needs to be well supported. I've taught you the detail generating questions. What does it look like and why is it important? Let's see if you applied or if this particular piece has any of that. So I'm going to start here. He needs to come when he is called so he can be safe. That's why is it important? That answers that detail generating question. He needs to sit and stay. Put your hand up and say sit in a firm voice. That answers the question, what does it look like? But then the rest of it goes on and it's just simply stated. So even though each of these details is in a separate sentence, the student has not elaborated on them. And as a matter of fact, if we come back to this one, he needs to come when he is called, we can go beyond just the word he has to come when he's called. So let's talk a little bit about this. And in the chat box, and Dave, if you don't mind, if you can just kind of talk about the things that are coming through the chat box when I ask, what does it look like when you call your dog because you want him to come to you? What does that look like? What would you say? How does the dog behave? And let's see if we can include what does it look like for this particular detail. So in the chat box, just chat out some ideas. What does it look like to call your dog? How do you do it? What does your dog do?
Okay, he should come to you right away when you give the signal, such as a whistle.
Excellent. That's exactly it. He needs to come when he is called, period. Use a signal like a whistle. What's another signal that a dog might come to besides a whistle? What's another kind of signal that you might need to use? Use a signal like a whistle, or I know I have a friend whose dog has a safe word. Good. Clap your hands, shout here, or a hand gesture. Excellent. Use a signal like a whistle or hand gesture to call your dog. And then we can go on. We don't have to do that. So he can be safe. That's why it's important. So notice, as we're beginning to look at the weaknesses, looking at the strengths, we want to make sure that our students know what to do when it comes time to revise. Because I don't know about your classroom, but in my classroom, you know what happens? I tell them it's time to revise, and everybody kind of, puts their head down and thinks, oh, I can't do that. But they can, and you've got to show them how. And that's really what the authors group revision model does. All right, let's continue. He needs to sit and stay. Put your hand up and say sit in a firm voice. Why is it important that your dog sits and stays for you? What is it about dog training, that particular training model? Why is that so important? Because this is what does it look like, but why is it important that your dog is going to sit and stay for you? Why do I need my dog to sit and stay? We could start this way. This skill, because of course it is a skill, right? This skill keeps the dog safe from danger. Excellent. All right, let's continue. Your canine should let you know when he has to go outside. All right, what does that look like? What kind of signs does your dog give you if your dog has to go outside? Yeah, some dogs will ring the bell or bark, scratch at the door, tap at the door.
And they scratch at the door, for the record.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes they just tap it with their nose. Sometimes that's not so bad. So your canine should let you know when he has to go outside. Some dogs tap the door or ring a bell. And of course, why is it important that your dog lets you know that he or she has to go outside? So they don't mess in the house, right? Some dogs tap the door or ring a bell. This signals that he has to go out to do his business. Excellent. All right, let's go to the next one and let's see so far what we have. Your dog will be happier if he's well trained. He needs to come when he is called. So use a signal like a whistle or a hand gesture to call your dog so he can be safe. He needs to sit and stay. Put your hand up and say sit in a firm voice. This skill keeps the dog safe from danger. Your canine, oh, by the way, I like that. I forgot to look at that. That's a word referent. That's excellent. And we taught that skill, so the student is applying it. Your canine should let you know when he has to go outside. Some dogs tap the door or ring a bell. This signals that he has to go out to do his business. All right? He needs to stay off the furniture. Some people don't mind the dog on the furniture. I was never a fan of that, so my dog knew he had to stay off the furniture. But what do you do instead? If you don't want the dog on the furniture, what are some alternatives for your dog? How might you manage that? What does that look like? Yeah, that's it. Have a space, have his bed, a nice soft bed, right? And of course, every dog just wants to be with his or her people. And so that bed being nearby, that's important, isn't it? He needs to stay off the furniture. Have a soft bed that is nearby for your pooch. This will help to keep him off the furniture.
And Crystal offers an alternative. He can be encouraged to stay off the furniture with a spray bottle.
Well, that's a good one. I love it. This will help keep him off the furniture, but close to the family. We can even go on. Another, right? I can keep going. Another alternative is, and I would write the spray bottle. That's what it looks like. Excellent. Good ideas. So what's happening here is this. I'm going detail by detail. I'm taking my students through the revision process because although the original piece wasn't bad, if I just say to my student, give more, or you need more detail, what happens? They have no idea how to do that. So now, because this is a skill-focused practice, everyone in my classroom has been working on this particular skill with this particular topic. Now what they do is they go back to their work and they do exactly what we've done here. Now in the classroom, which is a little different from our Zoom meeting, my students are very engaged in this in the sense that they're all sharing their ideas and I'm refining my questions constantly so that they're always coming up with new ideas. I love that you gave an alternative to a nice soft bed, an alternative, to do the water bottle. So in the authors group revision model, we have the representative piece. I show my student, I identify a skill and I show my students exactly how to revise for that skill. How often do your students have no idea what it is to revise? And they do things like this. They add a color word or a size word. And that is not what you had in mind, is it? And I could go on, he shouldn't chew or scratch things, but you get the point. So in the authors group revision model, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to make sure that the students understand how to take this very simple little piece and really begin to apply those detail generating questions. So let me show you an after sample. So after having done this type of revision, this is what my student was able to write. And notice taking the exact same details and really expanding on them. Your dog will be happier if he is well trained. He needs to come when he is called. Safe, happy dogs know the mailman is not a threat to you, and the head-butting battle versus moving vehicle usually ends in a painful loss. I want to point out as well that safe, happy dogs was one of the sentence starters provided that my student also was able to apply. He needs to be able to sit and stay. A well-behaved canine can play dead to avoid neighbors' unsupervised kids who are advocates of animal cruelty. Your dog needs to let you know when he has to go outside. Be sure to instruct your pet that kitchen floors, small areas in between furniture, and your fake leather couch are not good places to soil. He needs to stay off the furniture and shouldn't chew or scratch things. Notice how the student combined those. You want to teach your four-legged shredder great word referent, that the new shoes you purchased weren't for his leisurely play. Most important, he should know not to bite. It's important for your dog to know biting is absolutely off limits to every passing pant leg, except for the ex-wife who occasionally intrudes on your new happy single life. So a little bit of humor, lots of voice in this particular piece, great writer. But from that before to that after is what we're looking for. So after having gone through this revision process and really building the oral language, building in that written expression, my student was able to really take it to the next level. All right. So from here, this was really skill focused. When we focus on a particular skill and we want to then assess for that skill, we use our analytic rubrics. Our rubrics are available on our website, and you're welcome to grab them, pull them down. Those of you who are using our hub resource, all of our rubrics are available right there in your hub resource in the planning section. But the analytic rubric is skill specific. So when I'm teaching a skill and I'm having my students apply that skill, that's the rubric that I want to pull out. In a moment, you'll see what we use to assess a whole piece of writing. I'm just checking.
So Di, we had a question about the grade level on the after piece.
Yes. So that grade, that was a 6th grade student that I was working with. So that's a high level student. You can see some of the very interesting humor. My 2nd grade students aren't quite writing like that, but doesn't mean that our authors group revision model is any less effective with 2nd grade. As a matter of fact, it's extremely effective with all grade levels. Any other questions or comments about this particular exercise?
So, interestingly enough, one thing that comes up often when we do this is that teachers will, this is a piece that we would consider a finished piece, even though it's not the whole piece. And a lot of times that we as teachers oftentimes say, well, you know what, it's not a full piece from beginning to end. No, it's not. It is a paragraph that would work well within the context of an informational piece about dogs. So this particular example is one paragraph, but oftentimes we say that's you've completed the task.
And that's part of the revision process as well. We talk about process writing. Process writing is doing a draft, going back, revising that draft. This is a great way to really teach kids how to revise without overwhelming them. How many times have you had students write an entire piece and then said, okay, now it's revision time. And what do? They groan, they moan, they have to go back and revise the whole thing. But if we can teach them how to revise small pieces, it doesn't feel quite as uncomfortable for the students. So that's really part of how we manage revision and use the kinds of tools that we have available. All right, so Dave, I'm going to pass it to you to take a look at the full paper now.
Sure. So this is an autumn piece, and here's what I want all of you to do. I want you to listen as I read this, because part of the challenge with us as teachers is to look at paper and say, what would I work on? What would make a difference in this piece? And we actually chose this piece because it's pretty well written. But we want you to see that always, regardless of how that's presented, there's always things we can be working on. So everybody knows that the season we are in is autumn. My favorite part about autumn is that the nature gradually changes, animals prepare for hibernation, and weather slowly alters. In addition, the movement of the earth is in itself a miracle. Autumn, otherwise known as fall, has crisp, cold air that people quickly need to adapt to. Many birds, except for cows, fly south, where it's a bit warmer in early October. Crows fly south in late November. The leaves change slowly to red, orange, and yellow. This gives people the chance to gaze at this beautiful scenery for a little over 2 months. The smell of pumpkin pie makes my mouth drip when my taste buds start to water. Therefore, autumn offers us a large assortment of positive changes. Next, red foxes cross forests at dark gathering food to get prepared for hibernation. Squirrels chatter with other squirrels while collecting mouthfuls of nuts. Migration and hibernation are 2 different things. Hibernation is when animals animals, most mammals go to sleep for the whole winter. Migration is when you fly south. Many birds and butterflies fly south. Butterflies fly to Mexico for migration. Thus, animals once again are ready for survival. Finally, cracking dry, dead, fallen leaves break when your kids play outside while it's still warm. The days get darker and darker as the earth rotates further and further away from the sun. Skies get a darker shade until the end of November strikes again and becomes colder and colder as the beginning of winter approaches. Everything and everyone has experienced the various changes that are occurring prior to the white, frigid winter. In conclusion, it's fascinating to observe the changes in nature. Animal observation in preparation for the next season shows their intelligence in the preparation for hibernation. I enjoy experiencing the natural changes happening around the earth during autumn, and the fact that it continually repeats yearly demonstrates that the earth is in sync with our natural environment and automatically shares in this amazing process. So, Di, what grade level?
So this was a 5th grade student.
So 5th grade student. So as we read that piece, now all of us are in the position where our student writes, look at their paper. Now, what are we going to say? So any thoughts on this as we look at this one? And the first thing we do is this, always. When I look at student work, I go back and I say, okay, what's the topic? The topic is autumn. What are the main ideas? Because that helps me understand and remind me of what was the student trying to convey. So when we come back, we have the topic. The main idea number 1 is changes in nature. Main idea number 2, animals prepare. Main idea number 3, weather changes. So knowing what the topic is and those main ideas, anybody have any thoughts on what's a little different? What might you focus your energy on?
And remember, in the authors group model, we want to choose the skill that's going to make the biggest difference. What's going to make the biggest difference for this particular student and this particular paper?
So when we look at that way, ensuring sentences relate to the topic sentence, yay, gold star for Krista. Exactly that. That's exactly it. And at first blush, it's a good paper. And then here's the skills that we've taught already. We've already taught this student genre and organization. Clearly, she has a good sense of organization, right? She has broad yet distinct main ideas, where we taught that as a skill. Word choice, sentence starters, and variety. So these are all the skills that we taught. So what can we hold her accountable for? Anything that we've taught. And since we've taught all these skills in whole class instruction, through the methodology, using common language and assured experiences, we can go back and work on any one of these skills. And I agree with Carla and Krista. One of the things that strikes me is the organization, and not that she doesn't understand intro, body, conclusion. It goes down a little bit tighter to the fact that those sentences don't necessarily support their main ideas. I would agree with you on that. So we're going to show you what we do with this next. And basically, we would look at this particular piece, because it is a full piece, through the use of a holistic rubric. That's a rubric that basically looks at the paper as a whole. That's one way to look at it. The other way, in the authors group revision, what we would do, and then, I'm sorry, Carla also added she would reorganize it a bit and then look at some word choice. We agree with you on that. So what we would do is something like this. We would take it through, and here is a completely annotated piece. This, again, we always start with what's good. And if you look at these comments in here, you'll notice that there are some references to what we like. For example, a strong lead. When we get to the front, we actually start by labeling the introduction, labeling the conclusion, and then numbering the paragraph. That way, all of my students can follow along. But notice how in the margin, we have comments about what's good. So good use of detail generating questions. And what we underlined here, the leaves change slowly to red, orange, and yellow. This gives people the chance to gaze at this beautiful scenery for a little over 2 months. Notice again down the bottom, there's a notation about some good word choice where the student said, thus animals once again are ready for survival. So some very good vocabulary that she uses. But what we start to notice as we look a little closer and go through this piece are the kinds of questions that you're talking about. Is this detail in the correct paragraph? And when we start to raise those questions, or we can see that they overlap. Now, one thing I will say with this particular student that would have been a red flag for me when she started, Di, will you flip back to the previous page?
Yep.
The red flag for me when she started is this: changes in nature, animals prepare, and weather changes. All of those, especially changes in nature and weather changes, are going to overlap in some way. So they really weren't distinct enough. If she had done a better job with a broad yet distinct main idea, we would not have paragraphs where she's talking about changes in nature and what the animals are doing. And then she also has a paragraph on animals prepare, where she talks about what the animals are doing. So clearly those are in the wrong spot. She also has a couple of what we would call extraneous details, like the smell of pumpkin pie makes my mouth drip. That if I was to go back and say, is this about changes in nature, the smell in pumpkin pie would not work in that particular instance. So what we do is we go through this as a whole, we focus on what we think will make the biggest difference. And again, what we think the biggest difference here would be really to work on the ability to say, how do I write better main idea sentences so they're broad yet distinct? So when we establish what the weakness is, and we go back, and again, we're going to reveal to you how we knew that when we looked at this particular piece, we could check off certain things that she had done really well. Supporting details were a little off, and that directly relates to broad yet distinct main ideas. Her word choice, she had some good descriptive language, but her sentence starters were good. But I agree that the word choice, I think one of the things that struck Diane and I about this one was that she has two paragraphs, one that starts with next and the other starts with finally. So that's really about really reviewing those sentence starters, giving them some different language, and our introductions and conclusions. So when we look at something like this, again, this is whole class that we look at it. All of my students would have written a paper on autumn. They're all going to have their paper in front of them and have an opportunity to go back and revise. Now, I might challenge my students to say, okay, boys and girls, we went through this paper by Olivia. Here's what she did on hers. I want you to go back at yours, and I want everybody to focus on their main ideas and their supporting details. And I want every single one of you to read your main idea sentence and make sure that those supporting details in that paragraph support that main idea sentence. And then for us as teachers, what do we do? So if we see that this is something that all of our students are struggling with, well, we do what we do next. And Di, show them the prescriptive lessons that we offer.
So once we identify that skill, we go through the process of showing students how to really revise that particular piece. We may need to go back and reteach or review a couple of the lessons that they're not necessarily applying. Noticing that Olivia's piece, there's some really good parts about Olivia's piece, but the fact that those main ideas were so overlapping really caused me to then look at it and score it fairly poorly. It's going to score kind of low, even though I know Olivia is a really good writer. She has a ton of potential. So when I notice that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my prescriptive lessons. These all come from the section in the informational guide called Broad Yet Distinct Main Ideas. And I'm going to start by simply knowing, do my kids know how to sort and categorize? So that lesson is a quick awareness level lesson. Can they sort and categorize? And then we're going to compare some pieces of writing. And we're going to look at the main ideas specifically of those pieces so that my students get to see what it looks like for a top scoring piece. And then, of course, our pick, list, and choose strategy. Had we run the pick, list, and choose strategy before we ever wrote that autumn piece, guess what? Olivia probably would have had stronger main ideas to draw from. Main ideas like changes in nature or sports, activities, outdoor activities, clothing. There are many different main ideas that would have come from that pick, list, and choose strategy. And then how do we apply them? How do students practice? The name of the lesson is called Main Ideas, Don't Overlap Them, and then generating broad yet distinct main ideas. So those would be the lessons that I would choose based on what I have found to be the weakness across the board. Remember, this is representative of what's happening in my classroom. So I want to go back and shore up this skill so that every other skill I teach afterwards really follows from this particular skill. That's a real aha moment when we realize that if we have those broad yet distinct main ideas, so much easier to put the details in the right paragraph. That's why there were details about animals in the first paragraph and then again in the next one. And you saw all of that happening. It wasn't the detail itself, it was the main ideas that that student struggled with.
And again, the prescriptive lessons are really a range of them. So depending upon where your students are, you don't have to do them all. You can certainly pick the ones that are most appropriate or the ones that are most appropriate for the individual students. But the takeaway from this particular section about that, that authors group revision model is it really allows kids to have the same conversation as a whole first, and then they can go back and work on their individual work. What that does for my teaching is that once I've gone through that with one student paper up, now I circulate around the room and my conversation is very honed in and much less about the whole paper. So this is a great way to save time in your classroom right now and to manage a classroom of writers. It's really only possible through the methodology. So if you're doing the methodology and you've done whole class instruction and you have that common language and you can look at those papers and say, here's what I taught so far, and this is what I'm going to focus in on now, then this is a great tool for you to use in your classroom now to really maximize your instructional time. Di, anything you want to add to that?
No, that's it. And again, I'd love to hear from people. If you're trying some of this out for the first time, the authors group revision model is actually a PDF in your hub, and anyone who's got the hub guide, it is in the planning section of your hub guide. So you're welcome to grab that PDF. We give you some examples of the authors group revision model. But I want to reiterate that we did it with the informational pieces. You do this very same work if you're doing editing and revising. Very same concept helps with the editing and revising piece, or with narrative or argumentative writing. So regardless of the genre, what you want to do is make sure students understand how to revise. That's the point, and not just saying to them, add more detail, or here's a spot you need to revise. You need to give them that specific feedback and show them how that works.
So again, we always like to remind you of our professional development opportunities. If anybody's interested, feel free to go onto our website and take a look at how we present. I think one of the interesting things that we're finding is that there's a lot of teachers that are interested in the learn on your own time, where you can buy the courses and then have them for a couple of weeks and invest the time as you can. Everyone likes it because they can pause, they can take notes, they can move at their own pace. It's a great way to take in the amount of information that we give in the course of the day. So keep that in mind, that is available to you as well. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to chat them in the chat box specifically. And if anybody has anything that they're wondering on a broader scope, we always decide our topics on the webinar based on really what teachers are saying they need. And what we're hearing a lot from teachers right now is that they really need to figure out how to slow things down a little bit. And our website, yes, we're going to type that link right in for you.
Sure. Those of you who are here today, if you want to get a certificate, just snap a photo of the QR code and you should be able to submit your request for that certificate. And you're welcome, Carla. And I don't know if there was anybody from Texas, but I want to go back for a second. I promise I'll come back here. I want to show you, we have some in-person workshops going on in Texas. So if you're anywhere near the Amarillo, Houston, or Arlington area, and you want to go and do an in-person workshop, which could be so much fun, or if you want to fly down from Alberta and join them in
And
Texas.
see people.
And see people and be with people. Exactly. We're kind of excited that that is actually able to happen. Notice it's not happening in any other state just yet, but Texas is certainly starting to really want that in-person work. So, and Day and I are here to answer questions. Whatever.
Yeah,
you
feel
need.
feel free to unmute yourself. Like we're happy to chat with you guys if you have specific questions, concerns, if you're implementing and wondering what's you should be doing, what's not working. I mean, a lot of times, thanks, Paul, thanks for coming. A lot of times at this time of year, teachers panic because they're feeling that they're not keeping up with the pace of maybe a scope and sequence or the expectations. And I think this year in particular, we're hearing a lot of teachers talk about that.
You're welcome, Stacy. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, people, for putting on your video cameras. Really helpful. Nice to see some faces.